Honorable Speaker, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies and friends. It's a great honor for me to be here to commemorate a memory of one of the great heroes, not just of Sri Lanka, but of subcontinent. We recall the days when most of the countries in the subcontinent were under foreign rule. There was a great desire on the part of the people of these countries to be free from the foreign domination. And those were the days when people were fighting against virtually a common enemy. We realized that a true potential of growth, development, and prosperity in these countries will not happen unless we free ourselves from this foreign rule. And those days, therefore, we discovered a lot of common ground. When Philip Gunawardene was fighting the battle for freedom, he was fighting along with many of the freedom fighters of India. So when he was fighting a battle for Sri Lanka, he was actually fighting a battle for India as well. Or the freedom fighters of India, maybe Jawaharlal Nehru, Krishna Menon, Jayaprakash Narayan, many of them were also the contemporaries and also the comrades of late Philip Gunawardene when they were fighting together. So in fact, it's for me a great honor to be here to commemorate a memory of one of our great freedom fighters, not just for this great country, but also for the rest of the subcontinent. In fact, today is a day when we're actually celebrating the freedom of Sri Lanka. Today is a day when we are actually talking about the defeat of imperialism, also talking about the victory of working class. That's what he stood for. And also the emancipation of the toiling masses for whom he lived all his life. And it's also a celebration of the values that he talked about. It's also a day to when we can really talk about how the modern Sri Lanka should now be from here on the principles, on the values that the freedom fighters fought for. And I think this is, in a way, I must thank the Honorable Speaker and others who are actually here as a sense of gratitude for those who actually achieved the great freedom for this great country. And therefore, this is a great day for many of us. It's also a great day for the young generation of Sri Lanka. And I think Yadamani represents them, not just as his grandson, but probably representative of this young nation. Because this young generation should be really proud of those who made it possible for the Sri Lankans now to live a free life, and for the sacrifice of these people, it wouldn't have been possible. So I think today is a day for actually knowing the founder's contribution to this great country. I had no good fortune of meeting him ever. Though I am a friend of his family now, but I never knew him before. So in a way, I have a very unbiased opinion about his contribution. Because sometimes when you meet a person, you probably get enamored by his personality and have no objectivity in judging the contribution. But if you have not known a person in person, you have not met him, then it's always a good idea to know about him from his work, his contribution. And that's what really impressed me. And I realized that what he did in one life, I'm not so sure there's only one person who lived that one life. Because there were so many things that he did as a multifarious activities, multifaceted personality, that is very difficult to believe that it was just one person who did all this only in one life. And I am really very surprised to know that this is something, a legacy. His father probably must have implanted his idea of fighting for freedom in his mind, and then carried out by him. And I'm very happy that now the present generation is carrying it forward, and so is the next one. So I am sure this legacy will go on forever to make Sri Lanka a great country in the next several years to come. He was an activist, a philosopher, an administrator, an ideologue, a social worker when he fought for the malaria-affected people, a humanist, and therefore I was saying it's difficult to believe that he was just one person. He was an idealist in vision, but very pragmatic in action. I think this is a very rare combination because many times we feel that people get swayed by idealism, ideas, and they don't relate themselves to the realities of life. But it's very rare we find people with such a strong, high ideals, but a great ability to communicate those ideals into reality by action. And that's why he was such a great person. I know that many people will remember him for his conviction, his commitment, his integrity, his vision, his fearless and truthful attitude, and as a true fighter. And that all will really have made him something with a unique personality. As you mentioned, he was known as a lion. I think lion is known for when he roars in the forest, no one else can have an ability to counter it. So the lion is the right description of a person who was also a great orator. So like a lion's roar, his oratory probably impressed everybody, appealed to everybody's heart, and therefore he found a place, permanent place, in the hearts of the Sri Lankans and many others. And that's why we are here. But one of the reasons why a person becomes such a great orator, in fact, this is something which is very interesting to note, that just words don't make an orator. It's the marriage of words and the deeds, and ensuring that you actually have all that in reality made into the real life. That's something which really makes a great orator. In fact, many times loosely, we use this connotation of this person has high integrity. What do you really mean by integrity? Integrity is something which comes because if person gets disintegrated on stage, in real life, as a public life, and somewhere else, then he's not integrated. He's disintegrating into different action. He's speaking to an audience what appeals to the audience. But in reality, he's doing something else. And that's why the person of integrity will never get disintegrated into different personalities at different points of time, but will do same thing at all times. And that's what really made him a different person. And that's why his oratory appealed to the people, because what he was speaking, he was actually putting into action. And also, why he really could be a good orator is something I think the young generation must learn, that he was also a good listener. One who's a good listener can only be a good orator. If you keep speaking all the time, probably you'll not be able to understand what the other's viewpoint is. But if you understand, fathom it, integrate it, and then speak, that will make him. So that's how he became a great orator. And that's really something which I think some of us must learn, particularly a person like me who is a politician. A father of socialism, as he was known for, and I think that's something which will distinguish himself from many others. And I will come to it later, but I think his ideals, his care for poor will always keep us going in the next several decades to come. He was an internationalist, and therefore he was learning for all quarters. He had friends probably in all parts of the world. He believed in proletarian internationalism, which even has a relevance today. If the proletariats are toiling in any parts of the world, they are actually, they are already toiling. So it hardly matters what geographical boundaries divides you, what nationalities you belong to. What is important is you are really toiling, you are a proletariat, and that's why he believed in this internationalist to proletarian attitude, and that's why he really believed in the international aspect, and that's why I saw the mention that was made about his friends in Mexico, in other parts of the world, that really made it possible. An anti-imperialist who realized the true danger of imperialist powers ruling us. Sometimes people feel, even now, there is some quarters, people feel that the foreign rule was better. Because if they were not here, probably some of the systems that were developed during the colonial time would never happen. But first and foremost issue is, why did these foreign powers came to create this as imperialist states? They came because there was something to be taken away from here. There was a wealth which was looted from here, and that's why he realized it, that imperialism has to be defeated if the countries will really come up. And that's why he set up in 1927 the League Against Imperialism, which will always be remembered, not just here, but all those countries who are now free must owe it to him, that some of those people like him who actually worked on this anti-imperialist attitude, which helped quite a few countries later on. I am really not surprised that a socialist, a communist like him was also Buddhist at heart. And what really must have inspired him is something what Gautam Buddha did. A great king left everything when he realized that he has to achieve something much bigger than this. Same was his case. Probably Mr. Philip Gunawardhan had everything in life, the worldly goods, which otherwise would have made him happy, but he left all that to fight for those who didn't have anything. And that's why I really realized that he had a unique combination of many of these, and he's one, many things rolled into one. Today, Sri Lanka is what many of the principles that he talked about, I think they really make it very relevant today. In the world, there is always a talk about what comes first, economic development or social development. People think that if you make economic development possible, you create so much of financial resources that you can use those resources for bringing about social development. You can put same money for education, for healthcare, for constructing roads, and that's how the country will prosper. But there are some who believe that if the social development takes place first, that will spur the economic development. And in fact, that is proved in many parts of the world. In fact, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen believed in this very strongly, and therefore he has classified several countries on those lines. But there is a very shining example of what happened in China. China is now the second largest economy of the world, growing fast. Probably it will surpass United States in few years from now. But economic development that took place in China, which happened from 1978 when the reforms took place, couldn't have been possible had Mao not laid the foundation for social development from 1949 to 1978. So what really made it possible for China to grow exponentially was the investment that they made in the social infrastructure, the people of the country, and that's what made it possible. The person like him realized it so soon, and therefore they were fighting for a total freedom. This was the first party that he founded. In the first Sri Lankan party, incidentally, talked about total freedom. In fact, in India, also we had a similar debate. What should come first, the social development or political freedom? But there were very few who were enlightened like him who realized that total development, total freedom would mean that we must keep people in mind. And that's how really it made it possible. One of the person, despite being so strongly socialist and communist, had never had any dogmatic approach. He realized too soon in life that any ideology has a limited role to play and has a lifespan. We must keep reinventing the ideology to keep it relevant to the challenges of a contemporary times. And to make it happen, he really reinvented it in a very significant way. And that's the reason probably that he was attracted toward Trotskyist school of thought, as opposed to the Leninist school of thought. The Trotskyists believed in permanent revolution. They've never felt that revolution is static. You can achieve a revolution and put a rubber stamp, signed, sealed, and delivered, and the revolution is over. It never happens like this. The revolution is an ongoing process. It must keep changing with changing times, and that's what he realized, and that's why he was not dogmatic, but he was always pragmatic and worked on realizing the real goal, which are far more important than the ideology itself. And that's why in his political life, subsequently, after winning freedom for this country, he worked changing his political ideology, suiting the needs of a society. And that really made him, distinguishes him from many others who probably will get stuck to an ideology and believe in that, not realizing that time has passed, but then we don't want to do it. So it's like every ideology, even medicine that we take, has a period in which you have to take it. So that ideology has to also keep changing with changing times. One of the great contributions I will never forget, and that's also relevant for probably countries like India, is also the agriculture growth that he really focused on. In fact, even today, and that's why I'm saying the relevance of his ideas even today, Sri Lanka has 13% of its GDP coming from agriculture. But even today, 32.7% people are dependent on agriculture for direct employment. So that's one of the reasons why Sri Lanka is not as rich as it could be, because the smaller portion of GDP is shared by a much larger population. So if 1/3 of the people are going to share an income coming from agriculture, which is only 13%, Sri Lanka obviously could not be as rich as it would be. And therefore he started focusing on agriculture way back in 1958, when he passed the Paddy Lands Act, when 32% of the paddy growers were not owners. And that's what he realized, that we must give them rights. which resulted into a phenomenal success of agriculture becoming one of the driving force and removed the poverty greatly. He removed the crop insurance, started a crop insurance, worked on minor tanks to give water, which is a key input for any agriculture, and that's something which is a phenomenal thinking for a person in way back in about 55 years ago. Started soil survey, and that is something in 1956. Honorable Speaker, I am really worried by the fact that overuse of agriculture inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides all over the world are going to put our soil into such serious precarious position that after a few years we will not be able to produce any food. So somebody who realized this so back in time, in 1956, did the first soil survey for the country, who had such a great vision. I really wish to admire it. And that's why this removes poverty, but also gave respect to the farmers. That's the most important thing. I've seen that in India, for example, some of the farmers cannot get married because they are farmers, because they feel that I'm not getting a type of social respect that a worker gets. The worker is a blue-collar worker, but he gets more respect. So farmers, besides income, always fight for respect, which was provided way back in 1958. Another reason why I'm very enamored by him is my love for the cooperatives. In fact, in today's world, when the world is suffering to find out how we should go ahead now, the capitalism is not really succeeding anywhere. The state control of economic activities is also not taking us anywhere. So one of the only way we can actually address the challenges of modern society is by using best of both worlds and use cooperatives as a means of development. And that's what he started when he was a minister, and also worked on many interesting ideas of bringing farmers, a priest, a teacher, an Ayurvedic doctor, and a worker, the 5 different pillars of society in a village, bringing them together was the most innovative model. In fact, this could be a very interesting idea to study for those countries. In Sri Lanka and India, we have coalition politics, so we always worry how to manage coalition. And Minister Dinesh Gunawardene, I think most of the time must be working on coalition management as the chief government whip. So in India, we have the same problem. The Prime Minister's time has to be managing the coalition. But building such a coalition of a real interest group at grassroots level was an innovation which I think we can really work on. And his ideas at that time of making a society which is caste, creed, religion, sex, and ethnicity free is even valid today than any other time. So it's really interesting to see that what he talked about those days is still valid today, and those ideas are the ideas which will move us forward. The socialism is something which is even needed today than any other time, because we are seeing the world which is full of inequality. The widening gap of incomes is creating so much of frustration. So socialism is as valid. With changing times, with changed perception, can really solve the many address, and that's what is a tribute to the longevity of the ideas that he talked about. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am really very impressed that what foundation has been laid, it will now make Sri Lanka move to a much higher trajectory of growth. And therefore, I would like to congratulate the government for coming out with a new idea of Mahinda Chintana, the vision for future, wherein we are talking about Sri Lanka to emerge as a wonder of Asia. I am just worried why you are constrained by the fact that only wonder of Asia. It could be also wonder of world if you really make it happen, and I'll not be surprised if that becomes a reality. Sri Lanka is already growing at 6.4% for the last 5 years, and currently likely to be growing at 8% this year. And that's a phenomenal growth rate. In fact, very interestingly, if you just look at our neighbors, in Sri Lanka is now 113 in the world maybe, in terms of purchasing power parity of 5,600 US dollars on a purchasing power parity basis. But interestingly, China is not very far, only 96, with a per capita income of 7,240. And India is little lower, of 128, which is 3,176 US dollars. So Sri Lanka, in fact, is in between China and India. And I think Sri Lanka is really poised for growth, and that should happen because huge, high, great human development indices. Sri Lanka is almost 90-95% literacy rate. On infant mortality rate, Sri Lanka is the lowest in the region, and Sri Lanka has all the ingredients to to grow much faster. I think one of the areas that Sri Lanka must focus on in the vision that I already talked about is how do you combine only the two resources that make development possible anywhere in the world. In fact, any country, any society that grows only because of two resources. One is the human resource, which is something which is unique to that country. You can, of course, import people, but normally the local population makes the growth possible. So investment in people, which has already happened, now in future, if you can focus on skill development program, I think that could hugely help the Sri Lankans to grow faster. Sri Lanka is already one of the great destinations of remittances, because 7–8% of Sri Lanka's population already working abroad sends money back, which helps Sri Lanka to tide over current account crisis. They already got about $4–5 billion current account deficit. But thanks to this, only because the remittance is coming from abroad, you make it possible. Just imagine if you invest in skills, so many Sri Lankans can add to the economic growth back home, but also add to a lot of remittances which they can bring in when they work abroad. And therefore, human investment is one resource. And the second resource is the investment into the environment, the natural resources. Only two resources make it possible: human resource and natural resources. Money can come from any part of the world. In fact, money is always fungible. That goes into the destination where there are opportunities. But resources like natural resources have to be preserved. And therefore, this is something which now we should focus on. I'm very happy that in your constitution itself, there is a provision that states shall protect, preserve, and improve for benefit of community all the environment. And that's something which is a broad framework in which you can make the development. Sri Lanka being a hotspot for diversity, you should try to work on it. Climate change is a reality which is threatening imperialists, because we realize the foreign powers have taken a lot of resources back from us. If Sri Lanka generates clean energy, you can earn so much of carbon credit that those resources which have gone back will come from the same countries back into Sri Lanka by way of that money. So therefore, it is actually speaking, paying an economic tribute to a national hero by doing this. And that again, by probably exporting energy to other parts of the world, like India, you can improve the tax GDP ratio of just currently 14.6%, and also reduce the high public debt, which must be worrying you, which is 84% of the GDP. And therefore, I'm sure this again can help in terms of helping both Sri Lanka economically, ecologically, socially, politically, and many other ways. I'm very happy to be here representing my own country, India, because India and Sri Lanka have got great civilizational relationship, going back to as many years one can think of. In fact, Gautam Buddha, I'm very happy that he brought us even closer, even thousands of years ago. But in the years to come, I'm sure we'll have many more ways of working together. As I was saying earlier, we fought freedom struggle together. Some of the freedom fighters, including him, they were hiding in India when they were persecuted. And I'm sure, because they were seeking freedom from here, but we are under the same rule there. So the British were ruling both the sides. But the Indian camaraderie was so strong that they were wanting to provide shelter to the freedom fighters. But that was just one part. The LSP, the party that he founded, and Congress Socialist Party, of which Ram Manohar Lohia was a great leader, they all worked together. And in fact, the first session, they were all there as the parties believing in the same thing. In fact, the peaceful freedom struggle that Sri Lanka fought, I am not surprised, must have drawn inspiration from thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi. But there are so many things in common, because we got freedom in 1947, we got it just 1 year later. So there are many things, but now many things that we can do now in future together. When I was looking at Sri Lanka's exports to India, which is only 4.9%, and looking at India market, I think it is too less an amount, and Sri Lanka can actually do it. And I'm talking about coming back to the energy issue, probably Sri Lanka can change the balance, get more export into India, probably will strengthen the Sri Lankan currency, also help in many other ways. But this is something which can actually create a win-win situation. India and Sri Lanka are already interdependent economically, but could be more integrated in terms of making sure that Sri Lanka's true potential can be exploited by way of India and Sri Lanka joining hands, in which Sri Lanka, as I said in the beginning, would be one of the richest countries, not just in subcontinent, which already it is, but also not just in Asia, which it will surely become, but probably one of the richest in the world in the years to come. And for that, I'm sure we really need some new ideas. Again, Mr. late Philip Gunawardene never leaves us without ideas. He thought about that idea way back in 1960, when he started a Marco water and pump, which actually he sent a person from here, probably when he was the Minister of Industry, went to India, and the same person learned some tactics of that, doing it in India, came back, and it's now a symbol of one of the most successful pump with Indian collaboration. So made an Indian-Sri Lanka collaboration way back possible without any intervention of FTA or nothing was required. That really made it possible. So now we can really work on it. And as I was saying, the green power, which could be the new horizon which can bring India and Sri Lanka together. India has launched a major program of training almost 400 million people, 40 crore people, in skills in the next 10 years' time. It's one of the most ambitious and massive programs anywhere in the world. And we are actually working on it. In fact, in my own constituency, I have trained 56,000 people. I am sure we can use this knowledge, expertise, and whatever is our experiences with Sri Lanka to work in a way that Sri Lanka and India could become a powerhouse of trained workforce of the world. I am sure the special economic zones which Sri Lanka can create, which can create huge employment in Sri Lanka to catering to Indian market, which can benefit Indian manufacturing, as well as it will create an economic activity in Sri Lanka. So there are many opportunities which one can get. And I'm sure all these ideas are not new, but we have to look at it new. But the foundation of these ideas were laid by the founding fathers of this country, by the freedom fighters like Philip Gunawardene. And I think we really need to use those ideas, package them to today's needs, and make it happen. So there is nothing that we will need to look outside. There is no technology we need to search. The technological platform is already provided by him. I think we need to only really look into it to make it happen. So I'm very happy that I'm here to pay my personal tribute to a great national hero, and I'm sure he will keep inspiring many more people in the years to come to seek not just political freedom, but also economic freedom, and make sure that our continent, our subcontinent, becomes one of the richest and free from many of the ills that are associated with it. So I look forward to that. And again, congratulate my friends for really keeping this memory alive. And I'm sure that will keep us going. The flame, we should always be alive to make sure that we keep guiding by this. So I look forward to that. Thank you very much.